Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Welcome home. As always, really glad to have you with us today. We're going to start today's show in Kenya, where people seeking refuge in that country are now facing restrictions on their movements in and out of two camps there in East Africa. We're going to take you there to the capital, Nairobi, for a live report to get a sense of what had led to this decision and how it's being received. Also, you may remember that for the last few months of this pandemic, we've been led to believe that coronavirus does not impact children, or at the very least, if they do contract the virus, the effects on them are very, very mild. That all seems to be changing as new data emerges. We're going to be speaking to a pediatrician in South Africa for her take on these disturbing new facts, if you will, that are coming out, and what we can all do to protect our children. We'll have all of that, plus the big coronavirus headlines from the continent. And of course, there's also the bright side. Today, one word to describe our guest: royalty. You won't want to miss it. Let's dig in. All right. Well, the battle to contain the spread of coronavirus is leading governments to take decisions that were once unimaginable. And in the process, our lives are being upended. In Kenya, what we have seen is a number of restrictions put in place for the last few weeks. There's been that dawn to dusk curfew, restrictions on movement in and out of Nairobi and a couple of coastal cities. And now, in the last few days, it's emerged from the Interior Ministry that there are restrictions on refugees moving in and out of two huge camps. We're talking about Dadaab in the country's east and Kakuma in the northwest. Now movement in and out of those camps, which are housing hundreds of thousands of people. Movement is now banned. That decision has huge implications. We want to dig in and get more details about all of this. Joining us now from Nairobi is KTN reporter Timothy Otieno, and friend of this show. He joins us now for a live report. Timothy, welcome once more.
Thank you. Good to speak to you, Aisha.
Good to see you. What is going on? What led the government to take this decision at this stage in the outbreak?
Well, basically, the government directive is aimed at reducing the number of transfer cases from Somalia into Kenya. As we speak, Somalia is the East African country that has the highest number of confirmed coronavirus cases. The number currently stands at 835 confirmed cases, making it the highest in the region. And the government is trying as much as possible to try and ensure that those who are especially coming from Mogadishu into the country, do not bring with them the virus. Remember, these two camps that you've mentioned, Kakuma and Dadaab, are almost near the border between Kenya and Somalia. And a lot of these communities interact, cross-border trade happens, a lot of intermingling between the Somalis in Kenya and the Somalians in mainland Somalia. So the government directive that was issued last week by the Interior Ministry is to try and lock the camps down, ensure there's no movement either into or out of the camp, and try as much as possible to make both camps coronavirus free as they are at the moment. No confirmed cases of any person having tested positive for COVID-19 in Kakuma, which houses about 217,000 people, as well as in Dadaab, that houses about 190 people. So both camps at the moment coronavirus free.
Okay, so camps coronavirus free at the moment, but what kind of impact is it having on the inhabitants of those two camps, and obviously the local neighborhoods, the surrounding areas?
A lot of impact, because ideally these communities that live in the northern part of Kenya, their main mode of existence, for lack of a better word, is intermingling and trading. These are semi-nomadic communities. So they thrive a lot on movement, they thrive a lot on inter-community trade that is facilitated by open borders and open roads. Now, if you close the borders and if you there's an aspect of their social fabric that has then been altered. And I was even speaking to a colleague of mine who lives in Garissa, a town not too far away from both camps. And he was telling me there they do a lot of animal trade. And ironically, animal trade there, they were telling me they usually seal the deal by a handshake. If there is no handshake, then the deal has not yet been sealed. But now, because of COVID-19, you cannot just, there's that aspect of social distancing. And so when the government tries to tell them that, limit the handshakes right now, you cannot do it, for them, they simply do not understand that aspect. So for the communities and the social fabric there, it has severely been affected. Remember, this is just about 1 week since the state decided both camps need to be closed down. So we wait and see how this will affect in the long term. But at the moment, a lot of complaints coming from the locals in that particular part of the country, but it's a government directive that they themselves now have to adhere to for their own health and safety. Aisha.
Obviously, Timothy, these are refugee camps. These are people who are in need of support. They are vulnerable population. What about access of aid groups to these camps? Are they able to enter?
While the government has given a waiver or a special permit to aid groups like the UN, AMREF, Doctors Without Borders, who normally operate in these particular two camps to supply medicine, food, and any other essential items. Now, these groups have been exempted from that particular lockdown. Once they make their required application to the state, they're given allow their vehicles to pass through, their planes to land in the airstrip, as well as their personnel to cross into the two camps to provide the medicine and the supplies and all that's needed. Remember, these two camps heavily depend on the assistance of especially the United Nations that has been setting base in that particular area for close to 3 decades now. And initially, even a couple of years ago, Aisha, the state had said they would close down these two camps at that point in time when there was a lot of terrorist attacks in Kenya, and the government was saying that the two camps were hosting sleeper cells who are disguising themselves as refugees and then making their way to Nairobi to make attacks. Now, in 2016, the government had said it would shut down both camps, and immediately there was quick reactions to that directive. The international community, part of it, did go to court to stop that particular state directive, and a court did agree with them. So right now there's an injunction to stop the closure of both camps. Now, that's how important these two camps are, especially to the people who flee war in not only Somalia, but South Sudan. There are a lot of South Sudanese in both camps, as well as even local Kenyans who have been displaced and taken there either due to inter-community clashes. So right now, the organizations have been allowed to pass under special permits. There's a waiver for them to do so, but no civilian is allowed into or out of the camps just yet.
And how long is this going to go on for? Is the government giving any indication about duration for these restrictions on these two camps?
Basically, these restrictions are not time-bound. There was no clear directive from the Ministry of Interior as to how long there would be a lockdown on Kakuma and Dadaab. So as of now, we can only assume it's an indefinite lockdown, but also it's highly unlikely that it will be lifted anytime soon. Aisha, simply because of the fact that the country is experiencing substantive growth in the number of confirmed cases currently. For instance, today, 5th May, Tuesday, Kenya reported the highest number of confirmed cases in any single day. 45 people confirmed to have coronavirus just today, an alarming number that has shaken almost everybody to their core, because now people are actually seeing how serious this is. But also this can be attributed to the fact that the government has embarked on aggressive mass testing of people, especially in Nairobi, in Mombasa, and in the towns of Mandera and Garissa, which apparently are also on lockdown. So just because of the fact that there is a significant increase in the number of cases, and most likely this coming week and the next couple of days, we're likely to see more of the cases confirmed in the double digits, it is highly then unlikely that the government would lift that lockdown in those two camps, as well as an ongoing curfew that is currently on its 40th day, a 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew that has been witnessed in the country for over 1 month right now.
And Timothy, just for some context as to what the government is dealing with there in Kenya, according to reports that I've seen, they attempted to do a mass testing over the weekend in 2 hotspots that didn't have the kind of turnout they had hoped for. And there are also reports of nurses threatening to go on strike in the next few weeks if they don't get coronavirus risk allowances. Give us some perspective on some of the challenges the government is facing as they try to get the situation under control.
The challenges that the Kenyan government are facing are profound, Aisha. You do mention there's the issue of mass testing that kicked off sluggishly about 3 or 4 days ago. Not very warm reception received by the public. But ironically, the gravity of it is that those 2 areas that the government had embarked on mass testing are the areas that have received the highest number of confirmed cases in Nairobi over the last 6 days. Now, the places you're mentioning is one area in Nairobi known as Kawangware, which is an informal settlement area that houses, according to last year's national census, a total of 291,000 people. Now, in the last 3 days, Kawangware has seen almost close to 25 new confirmed cases, making up about 50% of the number of confirmed cases over the last 3 days. So the government perhaps was right in initiating this mass testing, and perhaps the public is now then realizing the importance of adhering to some of these government directives, because just today, 45 cases, about 17 of them were from that particular area. So these are people who are living in the community and maybe even spreading this virus without knowing. Aside from that, you do mention the issue of the medics. The medics in the country, and this is not a problem that is entirely isolated to Kenya. It's a global problem that even the World Health Organization had pointed out. The issue of PPEs, personal protective equipment for these medical officers, is one of the reasons why the nurses are going on strike, aside from the fact that they want better remuneration. Now, the government insists it does not have enough money to fund and sustain these particular allowances that the nurses are demanding. The irony of this is, Aisha, last week there was a scandal in this country, an alleged scandal of misuse of funds that against COVID-19. Now, the government had been accused of spending close to 10 million Kenya shillings, which should be about $100,000 of funds meant to fight coronavirus, having been spent on tea and snacks for allegedly medical personnel who are in the front line to fight this particular pandemic. Aside from that, about 3 million Kenya shillings is alleged to have been used on airtime, mobile airtime, to make different calls. Now, this raised alarm, and the president quickly reacted in the next day. This was about, I think, on Friday. The president gave a press conference saying that the country need not react emotionally, that there would be an audit after all this was said and done, and then the government would clearly state whether these funds had been lost. Aside from that, just 2 days ago, the Minister for Health made radical moves in his ministry, transferring over 30 officers in the Ministry of Health in Kenya, transferring them to different departments away from Nairobi, saying that these are part of efforts to try and fight the cartel that had been deep-rooted in that particular ministry. So in one instance, the government said money was not lost, let's wait for an audit. In another, it's making suspicious transfers at a time when they're saying they're trying to fight cartels in that particular ministry. But as it is, we wait for an audit as to whether $100,000 was spent on tea and snacks. And perhaps the country will have to wait a little longer, because, Aisha, at the moment, Kenya has not had an Auditor General for more than a year. Now, the Auditor General is the man whose office is tasked with the probing expenditure for all state departments. The one that was there retired last year,
and
no
still hasn't been
replacement as at now. Yeah.
Timothy Otieno, thank you for the fabulous reporting. Always appreciate the depth of your knowledge about all things Kenya and in the region. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. Please stay safe.
Thank you for having me. Stay safe as well.
Thank you. We'll try. There you have it, the situation out of Kenya, one that we must watch very closely. And we also bring you up to speed with the cases as a whole on the continent right now. You heard what Timothy said when we're talking about Kenya. They have 535 cases at the moment. They're recording a death rate of 24 deaths. Somalia, neighboring Somalia, 835 cases, 35 deaths. But let's put that in context for the continent as a whole. At last check, we were seeing 48,022 cases on the continent, getting these numbers from Johns Hopkins University, and that's collating the numbers across the world. 48,022 confirmed deaths, as you see right there on your screen, 1,878. To give you some context, some perspective, when we talk about the United States has well over 1 million cases of coronavirus confirmed, and the death toll is rapidly rushing towards 70,000. Africa still, the feeling is relatively at the start of its own outbreak. 48,022 on the continent. Death rate, number of those died confirmed at 1,878. Again, I caution you as you take these numbers to understand that we are not testing as much as we need to. We don't have the access to the test kits, the reagents that we need, and just financially we're strapped compared to other places in the world. So it is hard to say with any kind of seriousness that this is the full picture that we're reporting to you, that this is a full picture of what is happening on the continent. Nobody thinks that's the case. But as of now, this is what is emerging. 48,022 cases on the continent, 1,878 deaths, 750,000 tests approximately have been done on the continent, out of a continent with a total population of between 1.2 and 1.3 billion people. Only 750,000 tests have been done. That data point coming to us yesterday from the head of Africa's CDC, Dr. John Nkengasong. When you break that down, it's about 600 tests per million people. That gives you a sense of what we are dealing with and the mountain we have to climb to get a full picture of the spread of coronavirus in Africa. All right. We will continue to check the numbers for you. We'll check them again before the end of the show. But, another thing that I just want to say to you is the show is about you. We are doing this because we believe that we have to tell our story and we have to hear our voices. And so as we do this show, it's important that you write into me, write into the team. We want to hear your thoughts on the show. We also want to hear your perspective. What are you facing? Wherever you are on the continent, if you're an African in the diaspora, what is your situation? How is this pandemic impacting your life? Write into us, tell us, send your video. We'd actually really like to see you on video. Doesn't have to be longer than 2 minutes. Just send it in with your name, where you are, what you do for a living. Are you a student? Are you a trader? Where are you? What are you doing? We want to know. We want to know what you're worried about, what you think of your government's coronavirus response. Send your thoughts into us. Your voice is absolutely critical. This is a conversation here. So I hope that you'll start sending in your videos and we can start getting them on air and sharing your perspective with everyone who's watching. We're going to move on now. And we're now going to go to the southern part of the continent. Let me read this to you. It comes to us from the director of the World Food Programme. The world could face multiple famines of biblical proportions within a few short months. I'm going to read that again. The world could face multiple famines of biblical proportions within a few short months. In fact, what the WFP director is warning is that by the end of the year, 3 million people will face starvation, which is double the number from last year. In South Africa, where one of the world's strictest lockdowns has just ended, the economic fallout from this health crisis is already making itself felt, and we are getting increasing reports of hunger and just growing hardship. You may have seen some of the pictures that are being circulated, long lines of people gathered, waiting in the hope that they will be able to get food donations. We are seeing these pictures coming out of South Africa, just as the lockdown, the restrictions of movement are being eased. Now we're getting these increasing reports of people struggling to find staples, struggling to feed themselves and their families. How bad is the situation? Let's find out. I want to go now to Johannesburg and bring in acclaimed journalist and author Reedy Clubby. She joins us from there, and she's been keeping a close eye on what is playing out in her country. Reedy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Aisha. Hi. It's always great to talk to you. A heavy heart.
If I go to you, though, Reedy, it is something terrible that may be unfolding on your doorstep, and today you sound weary as we tackle this. I know it hurts your heart. How bad is the situation of hunger in South Africa? What is emerging?
Aisha, I don't know where to start. I actually don't know where to start. I'm angry about the bureaucracy where people have to register and go through bureaucratic loopholes in order to access food, in order to access the social grants that were announced amidst much fanfare. We're told that if people had not been employed before, they would access a 350 Rand grant. Now, that would buy you some rice, beans, maybe some proteins, some non-perishables. It would keep you going. But that you have to be registered and go through municipalities and councillors in order to access that. I'm just so angry that something that could be done in such a simple way is taking forever. What we are seeing is that the private sector, non-profit organizations and businesses are stepping in. They want to help. But Aisha, typical South Africa, guess what they're being asked to do? They're being asked to get a blooming permit, to feed hungry people.
How long is that taking?
Oh.
Why are we dealing with long, laborious, bureaucratic red tape when we are looking at starvation? And why, Reedy?
Government likes to control. They want to control. They think they're doing a good thing. They want to avoid a situation where we're all going out in numbers out in the streets because it would compromise the rules of social distancing. But the fact of the matter, Aisha, is that they need to pause and ask who's been feeding those people all this time. Ordinary South Africans do that. They give food. They are generous. They are NGOs that has been doing the work of the state for many, many years. They've got the infrastructure. They've got the grassroots connection. Let them give people food. Why do I need a blooming permit to give someone food? I will give what I can when I can. Now, here's where it gets ridiculous. Even it's not just a permit. They say that you can only give a certain type of food to avoid contamination, that's just rubbish. Someone is hungry and I've got bread and I'm going to give them bread. But now we have to get a permit and we have to get them a certain type of food. I think it's just government control, and we must be careful that as the government implements its lockdown, we do not have to retreat and, compromise the gains of our democracy, give up our civil liberties where the state, like Big Brother, is controlling every aspect of our lives. It is preposterous. It is heartbreaking. People are queuing for hours and hours. And you know what? We are cutting our nose to spite our face. The government says it wants to achieve social distances. Now tell me, if your bureaucracy is going to create a situation where people are queuing for hours and hours for food, you're not achieving the food distribution, but you're also not achieving the social distancing because people are out in the streets. It's crazy. It's insane.
And what kind of numbers are we talking about when we see these pictures of obviously the affected? It's hard to get a perspective. And what areas are there particular parts of the country where we know that people are being acutely affected?
Okay, so I'm reluctant to give a number because it changes every single minute. But we are talking hundreds of thousands, Aisha. The unemployment rate in South Africa, the official unemployment rate is 28%, but when you speak to economists and they say if you use other pillars, other models, you're looking at close to 40%. And with lockdown and COVID, it's close to 50%, more than half of the population living below the poverty line. So many people, millions of people are hungry. But here's the thing. I have seen that in informal settlements, that is a politically correct word to refer to slums. Those are shacks, those are slums. People are hungry. And then the second thing is that in Johannesburg, actually not far from where I live, it's about 15 kilometers from where I am, an area called Olivenhoutbosch, close to the capital city of Pretoria. There were thousands of people who turned up to receive food parcels, not from the government, but from a non-profit charity organization. Now, what happened there? There are many migrant laborers who are undocumented. They're out there because they don't qualify for the grant. You see, that's the problem, Aisha. If you're going to make the grant system so conditional on people being registered for unemployment tax, registered for this, you're pushing more and more people into the poverty space, more and more people into the food parcel space. And then, of course, undocumented migrants, forget about whether they are here legally or not. It does not matter. Your stomach doesn't know whether you are legal or not legal. You are hungry now. You've got a family to feed now. There's food to be distributed. Give people food. Don't ask them where they come from. Don't ask them how long they've been here for. So South Africans alone are starving, but then we're getting this xenophobic tone in the assistance that is being announced by the government. We want to first find out whether people are here legally or not. I just want to pull my hair out. It is cruel. It is inhumane. We can do better.
Is anyone challenging the government on this? Is there what's been the pushback? Who's articulating this? What are the chances of it being reviewed? Is the government even listening, acknowledging that the system isn't working as currently constructed?
So I just laughed a couple of days ago when one of the ministers said that we underestimated the extent of poor and hungry people. I thought, which country have you been living in? South Africa has a very rich and vibrant academic space, a very rich and vibrant private sector. And these are the people who do the research. These are the people who are filling in the gaps where the government is failing. I can tell you this thing. The one pillar of our democracy that has been strong, that has been resilient, has been our judicial space and our civil society space. There are legal processes that are being, formulated here. People are approaching the courts, and many people are defying the government's demand for permits and bureaucratic requirements. They're saying, I'm going to feed whoever I need to feed. Churches and schools, they're coming together. We're being asked as communities, there are WhatsApp groups going around saying, we're going to be collecting food, we're going to be distributing it, we're not registering with the government. I can tell you now that South Africans, to use a popular saying here, they're not taking this lying down. They're going to feed whoever they need to feed, and they're going to approach the courts to allow the feeding schemes to carry on with or without the government. It's not a perfect system. It won't reach everybody at the time that it's supposed to reach everybody, but people are mobilizing, they're galvanizing into action, and they're approaching the courts, which are still functioning despite the level 4 lockdown.
Really, before I let you, I've got to ask you, something that's, I know, on the minds of many, with this growing hunger, with this economic fallout, creating more and more despair, how great are fears on the ground of social instability? You mentioned, xenophobia. We have seen unrest in the past in South Africa when things have gotten tough and they've turned on outsiders. What's the mood like? What are you picking up?
Okay, so there are the privileged classes that are just impatient with the lockdown. They want to go to the gym. They want to buy cigarettes. They want to buy alcohol. Some of the lockdown rules are a bit draconian, and there's no reason why the government should create a nanny state and police people's social habits like smoking and alcohol. I'll talk about that another time. But on the ground, people, as I speak to you now, today and yesterday was the day that people who are registered for social grants outside of the COVID situation, people who get state grants like the old age grant, the child support grant, disability grants, they were meant to get their grants, but the state there was some technical error and people were standing in queues for a very long time. They had to return home. Some of them borrow money for taxis to go in queue to get their money, and they use that money to go back home and pay whoever lent them money to get there. They all turned home without any money. I've been watching the news in the last 48 hours, and there was one elderly woman saying, I'm going to die of hunger and waiting in this queue before I die of COVID. So that's the first thing. The second thing was that a very prominent government minister yesterday also said that the revolution is going to come sooner than we anticipated. Now, Aisha, just listen to those words. You are a cabinet minister. You represent a party of liberation that's been in power for 26 years, and you're saying the revolution is going to come before sooner than you anticipated. It means you knew that the way you're governing the party makes it ripe for a revolution. The ground is fertile for a revolution to take place. But you've been taking your time and being complacent, but that COVID is that firecracker that you needed to get into action. So it tells us that the ANC government knew that the way it's governed this country is a recipe for social distress and this revolution. But add COVID to that, people are getting restless. They're not willing to listen. They are getting out into the streets. There are the health risks, but they're saying, what's the point of sitting and adhering to social distancing rules when I am hungry? I just think that we are not collapsing yet, and that very leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa that I talked about, it's not being spoken about as much as it was a week or 2 or 3 weeks ago. The systems that have been neglected for decades are coming back to bite. I can tell you right now, South Africans know protest, Aisha. They know how to hit back against the state. They know how to be angry. They know what it means when they are being let down. And if this government has any sense whatsoever, they will act with urgency and just break down those bureaucratic bundles.
Really, if anybody had been in any doubt as to what the situation is like in South Africa, hearing you, just break it down for us, it really drives home just how serious the situation is and how quickly it must be addressed. Really, Clebby, we always appreciate you. Thank you for always speaking so plainly and unvarnished, in such an unvarnished manner. Thank you for your insights. Please stay safe.
Will do.
We're actually going to South Africa in just a few moments, but with a slightly different focus. Again, I just want you to take in what Reedy said there, just how dire the situation is, as she sees it, as she lays out this bureaucratic red tape that is standing in the way of, by her estimations, millions of people getting food and being able to make it through this pandemic. Now, you may remember that yesterday on the show, we brought you an animator. We brought you a film director and animator, Ni Ekimolayan, who has created beautiful short film, short animated film cartoon. In fact, you're seeing it on your screens now. And essentially, it's the story of an older sister telling her younger brother why he needs to follow the guidelines to keep the family safe and avoid anyone getting the coronavirus. Excuse me. It's absolutely beautiful, and lots of parents are turning to this cartoon to use it to help explain to their kids this frightening moment we're all in, and what this virus is and why it's dangerous. It's just really interesting to see the different ways parents are communicating to their young ones. And having had that conversation yesterday, excuse me, today we decided that we wanted to actually see how the disease is actually impacting children. And so we started to look into this. And you may remember that at the start of this outbreak, experts, scientists were all operating on the belief, based on the data that had emerged, that coronavirus wasn't actually impacting children, or at the very least, if kids did contract the virus, they had very, very mild symptoms. That was what we had been led to believe. That's what scientists believed on the basis of what information was out there. That's changing now. It's changing, and just today, the New York Times reported that 15 children have been hospitalized here in the United States with, quote, a mysterious syndrome that doctors do not yet fully understand. And also take note of this, that this mysterious illness has been reported in several European countries also. So we've gone from what we knew at the beginning, or at least what scientists understood, which is that kids weren't, in the danger zone with this virus, to now, according to this New York Times piece, 15 children being hospitalized in the US. with mysterious symptoms, and these same symptoms being reported in other European countries. We want to talk more about this and the impact of COVID-19 on children. Let's bring in Dr. Meredith McMurrough. She's the director of the influenza program at the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in South Africa, and she's joining us from Johannesburg. Dr. McMurrough, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Aisha. It's wonderful to be here.
It's good to have you with us. Let me start by just asking you what you make of the New York Times piece, these reports of 15 children being hospitalized here in the US. When I read the piece, I took note of the age range between 2 and 15. Talk to me what stood out for you.
Well, I think what's concerning is that the children are presenting with a syndrome that mimics Kawasaki's disease, which is a syndrome that can cause dilation and aneurysms in the coronary arteries and lead to heart attacks in children and chronic heart disease. And so it's a relatively rare condition that we know relatively little about. The causation, we do think that there is an association with other viruses and potentially other bacteria. So this may be yet another cause of this rare but severe disease in young children. And so it is concerning.
Yeah. I mean, again, I know you were listening, as I said, to date, we had been under I think we had taken to heart and been reassured by what experts were saying, that children weren't being severely impacted by this. I mean, what is the data prior to this moment? What has it shown about the impact of COVID-19 on children?
So I think we've been very fortunate in that amongst the children that have been ill, the rates of severe disease have been much lower than in the elderly and even in young adults. And so to this date, those data have been very reassuring. Now, I think we can still be reassured that for most children who get ill with COVID-19, that they won't be severely ill. They won't be hospitalized. They won't be in the ICU. And very few children have died with complications of COVID-19. So I do want to reassure parents that by and large, they should remain vigilant, but reassured that very few children do have these more severe complications. Of course, if it's your baby, it's 100% or 0%, right? So we do understand that even one sick child or even one death in a child is destructive to that family. And so don't want to underscore that, but I do think it is important to recognize that by and large, children do have much less severe disease.
And I think for parents who are watching, they'll want to know what the symptoms are that they should be keeping an eye out for. What can you tell us about that? What's emerging?
So interestingly, children have had less of the typical COVID respiratory symptoms of fever and cough and shortness of breath. There was a recent article published by the Centers for Disease Control that showed that unlike adults, where 93% of them met that typical case definition of having either fever or cough or shortness of breath, only 73% of children who were diagnosed with COVID presented with one of those three major symptoms. In children, it may be more common to have things like a rash or abdominal pain or vomiting and diarrhea. So while still a majority of them present with one of those three main symptoms, fever, cough, or shortness of breath, it is less common than in adults, and they may have a more atypical presentation.
And when it comes to adults, I mean, we're still working on therapeutic treatments. There is no vaccine. People I know who have come down with COVID-19 have just been told to, basically take Tylenol and stay indoors and rest. What's the regimen or in terms of palliative care for children?
I think very similarly that treatment of fever with Tylenol or Panadol and rest and maintaining hydration is going to be the primary treatment. There is no specific treatment available to young children yet.
You obviously are, as I said, at the Centers for Disease Control there in South Africa. You are an influenza specialist. As you look at this virus, influenza is a coronavirus. Talk to me about what stands out for you as you look at the way this SARS-CoV-2 is moving through the world and presenting in so many different ways in different populations?
Yeah, so obviously one of our biggest concerns here is the HIV population, the immunocompromised population. You know, there are over 7 million South Africans living with HIV. And so one of our big concerns is whether or not this disease might be more severe in adults living with HIV than in HIV uninfected people. And so a lot of our focus right now is on setting up studies to look at that question. We also are concerned that unlike influenza viruses, which we have many years and a long history of creating vaccines for coronaviruses, we don't really have as much experience in creating vaccines. And so fast tracking the vaccine development is going to be putting a lot of strain on the systems that we use to judge safety and efficacy and those types of things. So I think as we watch this pandemic, we are concerned about the severity of it and the fact that this coronavirus is more severe on average than an influenza virus. But we're also concerned that we don't fully understand what might be relevant to local populations in terms of severity. We definitely are at an advantage in Africa that the average age of the population is much lower. And so there are fewer elderly. They are generally more dispersed than in the United States or other developed countries where they may live in long-term care facilities or in large group homes. But it's definitely concerning that we don't yet know about the impact of HIV. We can say for flu, for example, that your risk of hospitalization or death from influenza is 4 to 12 times higher than if you are HIV uninfected. So, it will be really important for us to understand the impact of this in HIV-infected individuals in the near future.
Dr. Meredith McMurrough, thank you so much for the information you shared. I know that a lot of parents watching from around the world are grateful, as are we. Thank you for the great insights there. Please stay safe.
Thank you. You too.
You heard Dr. McMurrough there. When it comes to children, it is emerging that they are susceptible to catching this virus. But, again, to date, still symptoms are relatively mild, even though that New York Times piece out today is reporting of these 15 children being hospitalized with mysterious symptoms that they believe are related to COVID-19. But just something for us all to think about there that we wanted to share with you. Turning now to another story that has been somewhat buried in the headlines. We haven't talked much about the impact of COVID-19 on animals and the environment. That has largely been left out in many conversations, yet coronavirus is something that is sparing no one. Everyone is being affected. Every part of life is being affected in some way or other. And we're finding that when we look closely, animals are being impacted in a way by all of this. And in fact, what we're seeing in some places is that animals now are being endangered by local communities that they've coexisted with safely, peacefully, are now, due to the hardships caused by COVID-19, actually killing some of these animals to feed their families. This is where we've gotten to. This is the multifaceted impact of coronavirus. According to the World Economic Forum, loss of income is causing some people to exploit the environment. They say the economic impacts of the pandemic are likely to be devastating for the natural world. Let's talk a little bit more about this. Joining me now to discuss this is Paula Kahumbu. She is CEO of the NGO Wildlife Direct. Paula, good to have you with us. Thank you for making time.
Thank you for having me.
So what are you seeing? You're in Nairobi. You're an NGO. You run an NGO. What is the situation? What kind of breakdown are we seeing between communities and wildlife in this time of coronavirus?
Well, First, around the world, everyone is talking about how animals are kind of returning to the cities and how wonderful the blue skies are. Well, in Africa, where tourism is the mainstay of many of our economies, Kenya, 10% of our economy is based on tourism, and over 20% of our foreign exchange comes from tourism. So tourism has completely collapsed. Mm-hmm. And that means that all those people who are employed in the tourism industry are at risk. Many of them have lost their jobs. Many have been sent home without pay. Some have been told that maybe they go on half pay. Kenya is maybe 300,000 or more jobs depend on tourism directly, but millions more depend on tourism indirectly. So you can imagine what happens out in a national park. Rangers are no longer on duty because there's no money coming in to pay for them. So the communities who live around, who would be selling trinkets, providing food for the hotels, providing transport and that kind of thing, they're also out of jobs. And what that means is that there's no cash in those economies. There's no cash on the ground in those local places. And so there has been predictions, and now there is increasing evidence that around the country, people are killing animals for food, which is actually, if you think about it, how coronavirus got into us in the first place.
Yeah.
But also people are killing animals to sell them because they need cash. You still need cash, right? So this is an emerging problem, I think, not just in Kenya. We're going to see it all across Africa. The problem is that because we don't have the rangers on the ground, there is very little enforcement. So there's nobody to detect you. There's nobody to catch you or prosecute you. Most of our courts are simply limping along. They're not going to take, a small antelope poaching case as a worthy of going to court at this time. So I think our eyes are off the ball. Nairobi is locked down. We can't go into the field. Many of us can't go into the field. But what we're hearing from the field is that they're in dire straits and many protected areas are at risk.
And are there particular animal populations that you're most concerned about?
I'm very concerned about the Masai Mara because this is where a third of Kenya's wildlife live. And the wildebeest migration depends on this vast open space between Kenya and Tanzania and the continuity of this space. Now, part of it is protected by state, but much of that landscape is protected by local people who voluntarily put their land into conservation on the guarantee of payments from tourism. That vanished, it evaporated overnight. And so now there are some organizations, some companies that are working on the ground that are saying, hey, don't cancel your safari to Kenya, postpone it. So I work with one particular group, they're saying, don't cancel, just postpone it. And in fact, for now, you can adopt an acre in the Masai Mara. For 1 year, keep this landscape open. For $35, we'll keep 1 acre open. Because you can't afford for those communities who are not getting any money right now to say, I'm done with tourism, I'm done with conservation, I'm going to start farming wheat or maize or beans because I don't know when tourism is going to come back. So there are some very desperate people out there and organizations trying innovative ways of attracting international donor support to help keep those communities getting paid to keep the land open.
And with you, Wildlife Direct, what's the focus of your efforts right now as you lay out this problem?
We're concerned about two major things. First, as people have less money, they are much less tolerant when animals become problems in their farms. So one of the big problems is that often women are the target of human-wildlife conflict. They are injured, their children get injured, and it takes many, many months, if not years, for the government to respond with compensation. So one of our major initiatives is to support those women and give them emergency help, get them to hospital, get them whatever they need to keep them going until they can get their compensation. And we have a legal team of fantastic young lawyers who will help them with their compensation claims. So that's one part of it. The second part is that, the government is desperate to bring back tourism. It is such an important part of our economy. And they've said, well, if we can't get international tourism, why don't we do domestic tourism? But where are these domestic tourists? We're in Nairobi, we're in Mombasa. These are the hotspots of coronavirus, right? So even if we reduce our lockdown, I would be extremely hesitant to let people rush off to the parks. Of course, we want to go to the parks. We've been locked in our houses for weeks now. But those communities in those rural areas are very, very vulnerable. Some of them have never experienced anything like coronavirus before. Many of them have respiratory problems already because they live in homes which are very smoky, because that's their culture.
Yeah.
And so I'm really scared that we will bring coronavirus to these rural communities, and they don't have hospitals out there. They don't have clinics. There's nothing. And who's going to be affected? The older people in the community will have all these children, left behind. And that's my big concern, is talking to government about how should we behave. What is the responsible way to behave around returning, domestic tourism, restoring domestic tourism?
Well, Paula, we wish you the very luck with those efforts. We'll check back in with you in a few weeks to see how those conversations are going. Till then, thank you for being with us, and stay safe. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
This pandemic is impacting everything, us personally, our communities, the environment. It's just absolutely devastating. You've been writing in, and I want to bring some of your comments now and share them with everyone. And I want to say thank you to everybody writing wherever you are. We've got people in the house from Kenya. Toby Otacha is from Kenya. David Beer Boy is watching from Wellington, Freetown, Sierra Leone, which is my home. Thank you so much. Abu Bakar Sheku Sesay, another Sesay, there are a lot of us, also wrote in. Thank you for the kind words. I'm glad you're enjoying the show. Swafatu Tunis, hello. Please tell us where you're writing in from. It's always good to give a shout out to wherever you are. Demba Danjo wrote in. Kim and Lynblade sent this comment about Meredith McMorrow. She said Meredith is a huge credit to the US CDC spreading the truth of science. Chikere M. Eze is writing in from the UK, wants a shout out. Welcome, good to have you with us. Jacques K. Podonu, please forgive me if I said that incorrectly, writing in from Boston. Caddy Mans, hello to you. You're writing in from all over the place. Always tell me where you are so I can give a shout out to where you are, and also give us a sense of the spread of viewers. Thank you everyone for writing in, and Lewis Knopp as well, who sent in lots of messages. Thank you everybody. Let's do a quick check of the numbers again on the continent, where we are in terms of coronavirus cases. Let's put some numbers up for you just before we go. Yesterday, if you're with us, we were looking at something like 44,000, if memory serves me correctly. But today, here we are, a total of 48,022 cases on the continent. Of those, 30,125 are active confirmed cases. So you see there on your screen, 48,022. Of that number, 30,125 are active confirmed cases. The death toll right now on the continent, 1,878 confirmed deaths. That's what we're dealing with on the continent, keeping a close eye on, a country like South Africa that has well over 7,000 cases. Looking across the continent, lots of countries now with well over 5,000 cases. It is everywhere. One of the few countries, in fact, I think it's the only country at this stage that hasn't reported any cases is Lesotho. We're trying to find out why, trying to get a live report from there at some point in the near future to get a sense of what they're doing and how, to date, they have no confirmed cases of coronavirus. But it is on the African continent and it is spreading. All right. Before we go, there are 5 stories that we're keeping a close eye on, and we want you to do the same. First up, Nigeria. We are closely keeping an eye on Africa's most populous nation, where the number of confirmed coronavirus cases is rising, and it's going up fast. On Monday, the very day that the government began to ease the lockdown on Abuja, Lagos, and Ogun State, that was the same day that the nation's CDC confirmed a total of 245 new cases there in Nigeria. That figure is the highest single day infection rate recorded so far. It brings the total number of confirmed cases of coronavirus in Nigeria to 2,802. So far, close to 100 people have lost their lives to COVID-19. 73 of that number that I gave you. So remember, 245 new cases recorded on Monday in Nigeria. Of that number, 73 were recorded in Lagos, which is the epicenter of their outbreak. With those numbers emerging, some questioning whether the government was right to lift the restrictions. The governor of Lagos saying to the BBC, "It's always easy to say it's not the right time." That's what he said in defense of the decision. But Governor Sanwo-Olu also added this, that he is looking to increase Lagos's state health budget by a maximum of 20%. So we're watching Nigeria for you. In South Africa, also closely looking at the start of clinical trials of the tuberculosis vaccine, which we all refer to as BCG. Trials are underway there in that country. As you may know, a great deal of speculation about whether BCG affords some level of protection against coronavirus. There has been some correlation when you look at the rate of mortality and the severity of the virus in populations that have BCG widely administered. Scientists say the numbers seem to be much lower in those populations, but nothing has been categorically proven as yet. There's a correlation. That doesn't mean they've been able to prove causation. Now in South Africa, clinical trials are underway involving 500 healthcare workers. 250 will get the BCG vaccine. The other half will get a placebo. The clinical research organization doing these trials is called TASK. They say that they intend to extend the trial to up to 3,000 healthcare workers in Cape Town, and that they will be watching them for the period of a year. So again, we're watching South Africa to see what emerges. A lot of people doing work in this BCG space. We'll see what we find out. Turning to Sierra Leone, story number 3 that we're watching, my home country, of course, to the west of the continent. The lockdown ended there on Tuesday. This is the second 3-day lockdown that the country has had. It ended on Tuesday. On this same Tuesday, almost 24 new cases confirmed, bringing the national total at last check to 199 confirmed cases. Sierra Leone has doubled its coronavirus cases in the last 10 days. So we continue to look very closely at what's happening on the ground there. Some good news to bring you, though, from my home country. The President, Mada Bio, tweeting on Monday that after his 15 days of isolation, he was tested for coronavirus. Those tests came back negative. Again, in case you weren't following that story, he went into isolation because one of his bodyguards tested positive for the virus. Turning our attention to Tanzania, this story number 4 that we are watching for you. Tanzania's president, John Magufuli, has been making headlines in recent days. He's one of the African presidents that has decided that he will he'll place an order, let me phrase it that way. He'll place an order for that herbal tonic being made in Madagascar that their president is touting as a cure to coronavirus, raising eyebrows about that. Again, I want to stress, no proof, no scientific data disclose that tonic actually does work. And then the president now making other headlines as the head of the Tanzanian state laboratory has been suspended because the president is complaining about accuracy of coronavirus cases there. Very quickly to say that he says that a dirty game is being played and that he secretly had animals, fruit, and vehicle oil tested at the lab. Tanzania, we're watching. And finally, before we go, once more to bring home to you a statement put out by the WHO in light of this tonic that is being produced in Madagascar. The WHO has put out a statement warning people not to put their faith in unverified, untested local remedies. They said in a statement that the WHO welcomed innovations based on traditional remedies and plants, but said they should be tested for efficacy and adverse side effects. It also said this, and this is what I really want to leave you with. This is what if you take away anything from today's show, I want to leave you with this, that the WHO said. Africans deserve to use medicines tested to the same standards as people in the rest of the world. Yes, we do. And our leaders should ensure that we get the medicines that have been tested to the same standards as they have been in other parts of the world. That's all we ask for. The same standards and for our lives to be valued in exactly the same ways. $8 billion pledged on Monday for search of a vaccine and development of therapeutic treatments. So again, let's ask our leaders to put their faith in that. Before we go, again, I've said that several times before we go, but it's true now because we really are going. The bright side. The bright side is coming up next, and we always want to bring you a little sunshine. It can get a little heavy because these are tense times, but we want to bring you the bright side. Joining me shortly is Jackie Appiah. She's one of Africa's most beloved actresses, known for her films including Beyoncé, The President's Daughter, Princess Tyra, Passion of the Soul, and so many others. We caught up with her a little bit earlier. Take a look.
Hey, my name is Jackie Appiah, and this Tuesday I'm going to be hanging out with Isha Sesay on IG Live, so make sure you tune in at 8 p.m. this Tuesday. Don't miss out. Come through, ask all your questions, whatever you want to know. Come hang with us. It's going to be a blast. See you on Tuesday, 8 p.m. Home with Isha Sesay.
It is going to be a blast. We're actually hanging out on Instagram, so please join us there. That does it for today's show, Home with Isha Sesay. Thank you for hanging out here. I hope I see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Be safe, everyone. Bye for now.